At the beginning of the movie, a young boy named Peter Quill consented to sit and listen to a song from his radio at the hospital while accompanying his dying mother. Suddenly his mother called Peter into the hospital room and gave him a parcel. Peter was unable to look her in the face. Even Peter was shocked when the mother finally breathed her last. Peter ran out of the hospital. In a spacious field he wept alone. Peter, soluble in his grief, was suddenly struck by a blinding beam of light from above, only to find that it had come from a spacecraft that had then taken him. 26 years after the incident, on a planet called Morag, a dead planet abandoned by its inhabitants, a mysterious man scours the planet alone. The mystery man unleashed a device that could emit a hologram and give an idea of the planet in the past. The man followed the hologram's beam until it reached a large building. And when the guy takes his helmet off, it turns out he's a Peter Quill. Peter loves to listen to music, set his headphones before he reacts. The point of a Peter coming to this planet is to retrieve a mysterious ball of planetary artifacts. The scene moves outside the building. The alien armies under Korath's command surrounded Peter and seized Peter's mysterious orb. This is where Korath discovered he was Ronan's pawn. With no small effort, Peter was able to turn against Korath and get his ball back. Peter then fled tail Korath, jumped on his plane and managed to escape the planet. On his ship, Peter was alone with an alien woman. Suddenly, while they were watching TV, Yondu called Peter and said, "Fellow burglars should not steal from one another." And Yondu asked Peter to hand over the mysterious orb. It turned out that Peter was Yondu's henchman who sold him the ball he'd just stolen. A little debate goes on there, until an emotional Yondu puts up an AD, whoever captures Peter Quill gets a reward of 40,000 units. On a Kree warship called the Dark Aster, Ronan is an extraterrestrial terrorist who still refuses to accept the peace treaty between the Kree and Xander. Rising from his long sleep and performing a ritual cleansing. Finish it, he tells someone that Ronan swears to destroy the Xander. And Ronan killed the man without further ado. After finishing off Ronan's encounter with Korath, Korath reports his failure to retrieve the orb. Disappointed, Ronan told Korath he had promised Thanos the orb so Thanos could help him destroy the Xander. Ronan then sent Nebula to retrieve the orb. But Gamora pulled the plug and Gamora offered to take the ball back. Ronan has finally decided to take her out of the mission. Inside Xandar's very beautiful planet, a raccoon and its companions, a living plant called Groot, where they're bounty hunters spying on Peter because of 40,000 AD in return. While Peter got into a place to meet with the broker, he intended to sell the mysterious orb he'd stolen from the Morag planet. Peter just mentioned that Ronan is targeting these spheres. The broker, hearing Ronan's name, looked frightened and instantly halted the transaction and banished Peter. Just outside the broker's shop, Gamora is here. Little tempted, Peter invited her to get acquainted. While Peter was off balance, Gamora grabbed the ball and took off. Peter chased after her and took Gamora down. But Gamora takes control and tries to kill Peter. Rocket raccoons who saw her stop Gamora right away, and a four-creature chase was taking place. Peter got the ball back, but he had to be willing when he put it in a sack by Groot. She rises up and starts kicking him. Peter tried to escape, but unfortunately he was exposed to Rocket Raccoon's electric gun. The Xandar security guard called Novacorp spotted the incident and instantly secured 4 of them. All 4 were taken to Novacorp headquarters. There they were called in and examined one by Novacorp. After that, the Novacorp finally sent all 4 of them to prison. The most supermax in the galaxy. Arriving at the prison, on Gamora's trip, she said she wasn't working for Ronan. He's betrayed Ronan and wants to sell the orb to a third party at a very high price. They made their way to their cells, but before entering the cell, Peter passed by a detention room and noticed that one of the staff had used his cell phone. Peter tried to get it back, but the guard electrocuted him. They cleaned up and changed into prison clothes. The 4 of them went into the cafeteria, where the other inmates saw the 4 of them coming, immediately hurled at them, especially at Gamora because they thought Gamora was Ronan's bitch. It turns out there are a lot of inmates there who hold a grudge against Ronan that has destroyed their homeland. Gamora then enters his cell, and from a distance it is seen by a prisoner who is constantly watching the Gamora. At night, Gamora was taken by the inmates somewhere. Peter saw him go right after him. In the place Gamora seems to be killed by the inmates who bring her. But from behind comes a young man named Drax, who also has a grudge against Ronan. He wants to kill Gamora. But all of a sudden the Gamora with her present worked it all out. Angry Drax pushed her from behind Peter, trying to calm things down. Peter says that Gamora has betrayed Ronan, and Drax can't kill him first. Gamora can take Drax to Ronan for revenge. Upon hearing that, Drax let her go. It turns out that Peter's intention to help Gamora was that Gamora knew the buyer from Peter's orb very high price. The four planned to escape from the prison and then sold Peter's mysterious ball. Inside the Dark Aster, Ronan gets word from his source that Gamora has betrayed him. And Thanos wants to see her, so Ronan is headed to the sanctuary of Thanos' home. Inside Sanctuary, Thanos told Ronan that Thanos didn't want many reasons. Thanos only wants Ronan to acquire the orb. If he doesn't, Thanos will destroy Ronan himself. While he was inside, Peter and his partner analyzed everything they needed to escape. One is a battery that if pulled out, one prison will go into emergency mode. Groot took it out without even hearing it out, so the four of them panicked and split up to get the things they needed. The alarm triggered immediately attracted the guards' attention and attracted armed drones to stop Peter and others. And there's a fight between the cons and the guards. Drax, Rocket and Groot are trying to distract the guards, while Peter and Gamora get the tools they need to escape. Gamora and Peter have acquired the necessary tools. They went inside the control room, and now it's Rocket's turn to tamper with the control room. Guards opened fire on the room with missiles. After temporarily tampering with the existing buttons, Rocket was finally able to turn off the gravity in the prison and control the drone it made as a control room booster rocket. They finally escaped. Peter tells the others to go first, he'll follow. He intended to take the valuables that he had left behind. When others were already aboard the plane, Peter was holding a mysterious ball in his hand, keeping his friends from leaving him. It turns out Peter was eyeing his walkman was captured by a guard. After Peter got his walkman back, they fled. Inside the prison, Ronan came in and questioned every officer who was there. But the interrogation was to be delayed because the Novacorp troops were about to arrive. Ronan then charged his men in pursuit of Peter and his comrades, Yondu arriving at Xandar, into the brokerage shop visited by Peter. Yondu asked me why people were after the ball, and who was willing to pay the high price for it. Get back to Peter's ship. Peter and friends got to a place called Nowhere. At Nowhere, the five of them were going to meet the buyer of the ball. Gamora told three of his friends to wait at the club, while Gamora and Peter looked out for the buyer to make the exchange. Gamora and Peter talk about their past. Gamora told her that she was not the child of Thanos. So long ago, when Thanos destroyed his planet and killed his parents, Thanos kidnapped Gamora and trained him to be a warrior. While the two of them were telling the story, outside of Peter saw Groot and Drax fighting because they were drunk. He let Peter go. After the fight, Peter and friends were summoned by the buyer's messenger to enter the room. The buyers called Tivan the collector. Gamora and Tivan finally meet. Peter then hands the mysterious ball in his hand to Tivan. Peter then asked what was in the orb. The ball was then opened by Tivan, and it turns out it contains Infinity Stone. Tivan explained to Peter and friends, the Infinity Stone force is capable of instant destruction of civilization. But when the collector would pay for the item, his services deliberately grabbed the stone and burst the whole building on which they stood. The surviving Peter and Gamora finally took the ball back. And they're discussing where the ball is. The four were stunned when Ronan's army arrived, and Yondu was also after him. The Ronan who came was called Drax, who had been drinking. And finally they met. While Gamora runs off in a plane, letting Ronan and Drax fight. A nebula in pursuit of Gamora, Peter and Rockets. Drax, who fought Ronan to the death, finally collapsed when he managed to slay him. Back to Gamora's place. Gamora flew away from nowhere in a small plane. Since the craft was not designed to fly in space, the shuttle eventually slowed down, and the nebula just behind the Gamora shot it, until the plane on board exploded. And Gamora floated in the sky. Meanwhile, the Drax, who collapsed, was banished by Ronan to the waste dump. The Rockets and Peter were confused as to whether to leave Gamora or not. Confused, Peter finally called Yondu to turn himself in, and asked to be picked up by Yondu as the target. Peter then saved Gamora by giving him a breathing oxygen helmet. Peter froze for a while, but behind Peter there was an army of priests under Yondu's command that pulled them both out. Peter and Gamora are safe at last. Peter explained to Yondu that Ronan has finally captured the Infinity Stone. Drax was rescued by Groot when he sank. The rocket flew in a rage. Drax has finally admitted that this is all because of his own stupidity and carelessness. The rocket that heard it decided to leave. But Groot and Drax chose to save Peter from the plumbers. Inside the Dark Aster, Ronan is contacting Thanos. Ronan, conscious of the power of the orb, has finally betrayed Thanos, and holds the Infinity Stone and uses it for himself. And planned to destroy Xandar on his own. Inside the battleship, Yondu was beating up Peter because Peter had betrayed him. The Gamora, who couldn't stand to see Peter beaten, told Yondu to stop hurting Peter. Peter made the offer to steal the orb from Ronan's hands, because she had detailed information on Ronan's Dark Aster's craft. Intrigued, Yondu agreed, but out of the ship a rocket fired into the Yondu. Yondu then began his communication with the rocket. The rocket asked Yondu to hand over Peter, otherwise he would fire a missile at Yondu's ship. Peter instantly communicated with the rocket and told him he was okay. Peter and the boys are finally regrouping. They're all discussing their next move. Peter told the others his plan to steal the orb from Ronan's hand. At first the rocket disagreed and they argued. After the debate, Peter gave others an understanding that he would never let Ronan wipe out billions of innocent lives using Infinity Stone. Until everyone there is in agreement and willing to help Peter stop Ronan's actions. Peter and the boys then worked out a plan with the trainers to defeat Ronan. Peter and the boys are finally getting ready to roll. Peter contacted Officer Novacorp, and Ronan has Infinity Stone and is on his way to Xandar to destroy the planet. Peter here offered his assistance, and the officer immediately spoke to the chairman of Novacorp. And finally the Novacorp agreed to accept Peter's help. Dark Aster appears to be arriving in Xandar's atmosphere. Yondu's troops and Novacorps are collaborating to break into the Dark Aster. The rocket team opened fire on the ship. Ronan then sent down his army immediately to protect the Dark Aster. Rocket tried to break into the Dark Aster. Peter and Yondu were ready to enter, but Yondu was hit by an enemy plane and fell. Peter then tries to outwit Ronan's forces, and eventually the Novacorp comes to help them push off the Dark Aster. Peter managed to get on the plane. Nebula reports to Ronan that the ship has been compromised and has ordered a lockdown of Ronan's chambers. Chief Novacorp took the initiative and ordered his troops to set up a blockade, so that the Dark Aster would not land in the Xandar region. Meanwhile, inside the Dark Aster, Peter and friends go in and sneak out. In the darkness, Groot took out a bunch of glowing fireflies from his arm to light the way. Peter and the guys go down the aisle and suddenly Nebula comes in front of them. As the Nebula was speaking, Drax shot him on the fly. Yondu's landing, he's surrounded by Ronan's forces. Even Yondu played his small spear and pierced Ronan's entire army until it all came crashing down. Get back to the Nebula. Nebula is facing Gamora, and they're both fighting. Ronan in his chambers sees the blockade of Novacorp, ordering a total attack on Xandar planet. While Peter and his friends were confronted by Korath, and they fought. Meanwhile, the rockets fired on Ronan's small ships falling from the sky. With a tremendous effort against Korath, Drax was finally able to rip the machine from Korath's head until he died. Ronan then unleashed the Infinity Stone and destroyed the Novacorp's blockade. until the ship from Ronan made it through the blockade and killed a lot of Novacorp soldiers. Rocket ordered Peter to quickly finish his mission. Gamora, who was trying to open the door for Peter, was slightly distracted by the nebula. The battle was raging, and Gamora finally defeated the nebula. The nebula is on the verge of falling and Gamora is trying to help her, but the nebula would rather fall than be helped by the Gamora. Peter and friends finally made it into Ronan's chamber, and they fired their missiles at Ronan. Ronan, who was shot in the cold, angry Drax went straight for Ronan to kill him. But he first strangled her. And from outside the ship, the rocket crashed into Ronan until it exploded and fell. In the last moments of Ronan's ship's fall, Groot instantly helped his friends with powerful, precise wooden patterns. Rocket cries out to see Groot do that 'cause it'll kill him. Then fall the Dark Aster and crash on the surface. Thanks to the protectors of Groot, Peter and the boys were able to survive the crash. They were amazed to see that Ronan had survived. Rocket attacks Ronan have been futile. Ronan, who's gearing up to destroy an entire planet, was diverted by a sudden Peter. It turned out it was his idea to distract Ronan from destroying the Infinity Stone weapon in Ronan's hands. The weapon was destroyed. Peter's closest to Ronan, so he catches the stone. Peter was affected by the Infinity Stone and a glimpse of his mother's shadow. A strange turn is that a mere human Peter can control Infinity Stone, and with the help of his friends, he has brought Ronan to nothing. Gamora plunges the Infinity Stone directly into the ball in his hand. After the accident, Yondu asked for the pattern containing Infinity Stone. Peter handed him the ball while warning Yondu not to open it because it was too dangerous. Yondu left Xandar. Elsewhere, the rocket sobbed because Groot was no more. Drax is nearby trying to quiet the rocket. Inside the headquarters of Novacorp, the head of Novacorp explains that the mother of Peter is of Earth, but her father is not of Earth. No one knows who is unknown. And that's why Peter was able to hold Infinity Stone for so long. The Novacorp gave Peters and new aircraft comrades, eliminating their criminal records for assisting Xandar. On board, Peter opened a present from his deceased mother, who had not been opened since 26 years ago. Turns out the present was a mixtape. Peter tuned him up and rejoiced with his friends. Elsewhere, curious Yondu finally opened the ball in his hand, and it turned out it was a doll, and the original Infinity Stone ball was secured by the Novacorp party. At the end of the scene, Groot wasn't dead after all. Groot'll come back to life if he gets planted again, he'll pop a cute little bud. And the movie is over.